Good afternoon, everyone. Just checking that everyone could hear me. Okay. Is everyone able to hear me? Yeah? Okay, good. Okay. So, what I was thinking of doing to talk about Passover. The holiday is approaching very soon. As you know, Thursday is Thursday is the fast of the firstborn. And then we have Shabbat. We have to burn the chametz by Friday morning. And then when we go into Shabbat, it's a very unique arrangement this year where we pretty much begin Passover, not the holiday, but eating Passover food from Friday night, with the exception of some chalot that we put away for the meal on Friday night and the meal on Shabbat morning, because we're not allowed to eat matzah 30 days before Passover. And then, we finish eating the challah on Shabbos morning, and after we finish eating the challah before the prescribed time, which I think is 11:21 or so, we then flush the whatever crumbs that were eaten carefully. We flush it down the toilet, and then we begin for the preparations for the actual night of Passover, which is Saturday night, when we will recite the Haggadah and observe all the commandments of the holiday. So, since Passover is approaching, instead of talking about the Parsha, we're going to learn a little bit about Passover. Now, begin by saying that Passover is about freedom, obviously, but freedom is not just freedom from slavery in Egypt. The reason why the story of Passover is not only recited every year on the night of Passover, but actually each and every day in the Shema, morning and evening, we remember the Exodus from Egypt, and the Ten Commandments began with, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, is because the fundamental bedrock principle of Judaism is the idea that man was created in the image of God, and because man is in the image of God, just like God has no restrictions, no limitations, no boundaries, no inhibitions, and God is free, we as human beings were created to be free. Freedom is the oxygen of the soul. Someone said, give me liberty, or give me freedom, or give me death. The human condition is made to be free, and that's why in Judaism, when someone sells themselves into slavery, it could only be for 6 years to sustain themselves or to pay back a theft that they stole. But another way to be, if a person insists they want to stay on into slavery, they get their ear pierced, which is a mark of shame that they chose to be a slave. As the rabbis say, this ear that heard at Mount Sinai should not have any other masters except God, chose a human master rather than God to be their master, and therefore they're permanently marked with this piercing of the ear. Because in Judaism, we don't pierce the ear for the other violations of commandments at Mount Sinai. Theoretically, why don't we pierce the guy who killed the ear, or the guy who committed adultery, or the guy who violated Shabbat, because his ear heard at Mount Sinai? Obviously, the overarching message of Mount Sinai is, you are in my image, and therefore I took you out of the land of Egypt, because the message of Passover is that God desires every human being to be free. And so on Passover, we really have to ask ourselves, what does freedom mean? Now, physical freedom, we know what that means. Thank God we're free. We're not incarcerated. God forbid we're not in slavery. And of course, there are some forms of slavery that still exist till this very day. And Passover reminds us, like in every generation, that we have to fight, so to speak, and demand, like Moses did, the freedom of every single human being. But I think for us on a more personal level, because we always have to ask ourselves, not just what does this story mean, but what does the story mean to me? We have to personalize it. The night of Passover is about memory. Memory is M-E, my story. history is his story or her story, someone else's story. This is not a history lesson on Passover. It's a personal story. Every human being craves freedom, and sometimes we're held back in life, and there could be other forms of emancipation from poverty, which gives you financial freedom, or from sickness, which gives you health, which gives you mobility, which gives you personal freedom. But there's also emotional and psychological imprisonment. Now, I think the worst case scenario that we're all familiar with, that we could all point to in our society, is addictions. A person who is an addict to a substance, they are controlled until they break free from that addiction. They're being controlled by an external substance. So their pharaoh is the drug or the alcohol or whatever other addiction they have. Pharaoh is not just a king in Egypt. Pharaoh is the ego of man, the taskmaster, which demands that we become subservient to its desires, its passions, its wills, and doesn't allow us the freedom to choose our life's course based on our mind and our soul, but rather our mind and our soul becomes enslaved to our animalistic desires and passions. So obviously that's a deeper meaning of freedom, and the exodus from Egypt is a daily occurrence because every day we could advance further in our journey of achieving greater and greater freedom in our lives. So the message of Passover is that we have to break out of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim also means Mitzrayim, limitations. Whatever is your limitations, whatever is your boundaries that confine you and constrict you and don't allow you to live fully. So for example, sadness, depression, that's an imprisonment because the soul is not being fully expressed. When someone's happy, you say they're full of life, which means when you're happy, you're optimizing your full life's energy. When you're depressed, God forbid, or sad, I'm not talking about chemical depression, but depressed because of worry or sadness or guilt or regrets or resentment or whatever it is, you're being confined. You're being limited. You're not allowing yourself to utilize the full strength and power that God gave you. So Pesach is a very personal and very deep holiday that has very, very essential, critical elements to it that every human being can relate to. And that's why it's a daily recital in the Shema, because every day we have to work on ourselves to say, how can I become freer? Sometimes our ego stands in our way. The ego, the pride, the arrogance of a person could be the greatest prison. And the message of Passover, I once heard something beautiful. They said, what's the difference between slavery and freedom? The difference is which side of the door is the handle on. If the handle is on the outside, then you don't control your freedom. Someone else determines if you go free or not. You're locked in. But if the handle is on the inside of the door, you determine whether you go free. And therefore, the message of Passover is that the door to the handle is on your side. If whatever it is that's confining you and constricting you, your mind and your heart and your soul has the power to unlock any doors. But if not, these imprisonments, whether they're your ego, whether it's fear or whatever it is that's holding you back, sadness, they could be as powerful as walls of a prison. It's not only physical walls. It's emotional, psychological, spiritual boundaries that confine us. So it's very important to learn the lessons and to see Passover not just as a time that we have to work hard and prepare for the holiday, but as an amazing opportunity. It's almost like an annual group therapy where all of the Jews sit down and talk about the past lessons and how they pertain and how they're relevant 3,333 years later today, and not just as a history book. The Haggadah is a personal story of our emancipation. That's why it's interesting. In the Haggadah, we say, what do we say in the Haggadah? We say, B'chol dor v'dor, every generation, Chayad Adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. Every person has to see themselves like you are personally leaving Egypt. It's not just your ancestors. Lo et avoseinu b'vad gal HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God didn't just redeem our ancestors, he redeemed us. And obviously he gave us the Torah, and the Torah is the blueprint for living a free life. And that's why our rabbis say there's no free person except the person who engages in the study of Torah. Because you may say, well, Torah is not freedom. Torah encumbers and restricts my life. I can't eat certain foods. I can't work on Shabbat. I can't do this. I can't do that. But the truth of the matter is that those are external impositions. What Judaism and Torah does is it is the DNA script for a happy, meaningful, purposeful life. And as Viktor Frankl taught us, that he learned in the Holocaust, that what people desire more than anything else is not pleasure, but purpose. And the Torah gives meaning and context and purpose and structure and direction to our lives, and allows us to express our true self. So just to use a very mundane example, if I tell you you can't eat a list of foods that are not good for you, you may say, well, why all these restrictions? I can't eat this, I can't drink that. That's terrible. I want to be free. I want to eat whatever I want to eat. So if you obey those rules, you're healthy, you're strong, you feel good about yourself, you have a lot of energy, and you live a beautiful, healthy, strong life. But if you ignore all of that and you eat all the junk food that's bad for you and lacks nutrition and protein and good sustenance, then you become lethargic and tired and weary and overweight and encumbered by the weight, right? So you may say, well, I'm free. I could eat anything I want. Yeah. And then your life energy is sapped because of the health challenges you face. As opposed to, yeah, I constrict myself to eat healthy food. But as a result, I have a much more happier and also more empowered life and lifestyle, because I have the freedom of being true to my body's real desires. My body may crave junk food and desire the pleasure of it, but what my body really wants is healthy food, so it could be strong and healthy. Same thing with the human being and Torah. My body may desire all different types of illicit pleasures and joys in the world, but what my soul, my true essence wants is to be true to itself. True to itself means living a moral, ethical, spiritual, divine life in the image of God. And therefore, the more we feed the soul its nutrition, which is the Torah, the freer we are to be our true selves. Because freedom is being true to yourself. One of the things that happened in Egypt was that they gave men the roles of women, the women the roles of men. In other words, servitude is when you're forced to do something that's contrary to your true nature. So if your divine nature is to be godly and to be spiritual and to be connected to God, and you deny the soul that true nature and expression, then the soul can't be happy. The soul feels suffocated. And therefore, a lot of people today mistakenly pursue material things for happiness and fulfillment. But what they fail to realize is that you may be satisfying the desires of the body and the passions, but your true nature is your soul. And unless you feed your soul what it wants, which is Torah and mitzvahs and connection to God, it cannot be happy. So the Talmud says, the true happy person is someone who is engaged in a life of Torah and mitzvot. So the Torah is not a burden, God forbid, it is the key to our freedom, the key to our happiness. So we don't have to look no further than the name of Passover to understand the message of Passover. The name of Passover is Pesach. Why is it called Pesach? Because God passed over the Jewish homes. He jumped over the Jewish homes when he killed the firstborn in Egypt. Now, this, of course, was the final plague, which led to the ultimate redemption of the Jewish people. But there were many miracles. Why do we name the holiday after that one event, passing over the Jewish homes and sparing the firstborn in every Jewish home? And the answer is that this name, jumping, leaping, encapsulates the essence of the holiday. The essence of the holiday is that human beings are free, and human beings have to live with hope and faith in God, which means that we don't only follow a natural progression step by step, but we can take a a quantum leap forward in our lives. That no matter where we find ourselves, God blessed Abraham, your children will be like the sand of the earth, the dust of the earth, and the stars of the heaven. Why that polar opposite contrast? And one of the answers is that even when we're stuck in the sand of the earth, we could dream and reach for the stars in the heaven, and we could leap from the lowest point of the dust of the earth, the lowest point we find ourselves in, to the greatest heights of the heavens. And look no further than the Seder. How does it end? 3 words, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. Jews said that for 1900 years in exile. In concentration camps, they said, next year in Jerusalem. Could you imagine a Jew in Bergen-Belsen and Dachau and Auschwitz, families being murdered, gassed, and he's sitting there at the Seder, he says, next year in Jerusalem? That's what it means to be a Jew, to be a dreamer, to never lose hope, to never lose faith. Why? Because we can leap to the greatest heights. We just need faith that God can take us in a motion of Pesach, of a jump forward. We don't have to follow the predictions. The Jewish people never followed the predictions of the world. We always believed in our ability to transcend the laws of nature. And that's the beginning message of Passover. Pesach, we have to leap forward in our lives. But in order to do that, to take a leap, we need courage. And where do we see this? At the splitting of the sea. What happened at the splitting of the sea? The Jews started crying. The Egyptians are chasing us. What's going to happen? We're going to die in the desert. Why did God take us out of Egypt? Let's go back. And Moses says, go forward. Don't look back. And at that moment, when they were being chased by the Egyptians and the sea was in front of them, there was one man with tremendous courage. His name was Nachshon, and he jumped into the sea, and that's when the sea split. And the question is, why this story? And he became a great leader. The Torah says, Nachshon ben Amminadab, from the tribe of Judah, all the kings of Israel, David, Solomon, the Mashiach, all come from him. Why? Because to be a leader, and every Jew is a leader, means to take that leap forward. How do you jump in the water? Are you suicidal? You're going to drown. Who told you to do that? And the answer is, with faith and courage, anything's possible. This roaring sea can split, and that's what happens. And that's the message of Passover. We have to be like Nachshon. We have to take initiative. We can't sit back and cry and bemoan our situation. Today we live in a society that's all about victimhood and grievances, and everyone's upset. I'm persecuted. I'm a minority. I'm this and that. Judaism doesn't believe in victimhood. Judaism believes in empowerment. You take control of your life. With faith and courage and hope and optimism, you could overcome everything. And hope is not just blind optimism. I'm an optimist, it's going to be good. No, I have faith in God, and that's why I know it's going to be good. And that's how Jews have lived, and that's how Jews have survived and outlived all their mighty enemies, because we have this hope and faith. And that's why the bread of Pesach is called the bread of faith. Because, people say seeing is believing. Seeing is always a metaphor for clarity. I see what you're saying. Now I see it. Judaism says, don't just see it. Eat it. Taste it. Tamuru, taste God and see he's good. We start with a full Seder plate. We have the zroa and the egg and the matzah and the charoses. By the night end, you look at the kaira, the Seder plate, it's all empty. Where is it? It's inside of us. We consumed it. And the secret to our eternal nation is that we internalize our values. We don't just pay lip service to it. We don't just have some superficial faith, but we act on that faith. And that's what Nachshon did. He acted on that faith, and he leaped into the water, and that's when the water split. And the idea of Pesach is the idea of leaping, of jumping, but you need courage. There was once a professor of psychology, and he was giving his students a test, and the students were expecting a long test, and they opened up the test, they turned it over, it was one question. And the question the teacher asked was, what is courage? And all the students started thinking. First they were excited, one question, easy test, but now are they going to answer, what is courage? And they started writing long essays, what courage is. One student wrote 2 words and handed it in. And the professor gave him 100. And you know what the student wrote? On the question, what is courage? The student answered, this is, and submitted the paper. Courage means being fearless. Why are you fearless? because you're faithful and you trust in God. And that's the story of the Jewish people. And God says, I remember the faith that you showed when you followed me into a barren desert. And that's why it's fascinatingly on the night of Passover, the matzah represents, the matzah is a food that has like a schizophrenic nature. The matzah is like almost like something that has an identity crisis. On the one hand, we say this is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate, meaning matzah represents the food they ate in slavery. The Egyptians fed them matzah because they wanted them to be satiated without a great expense. But the same matzah is the bread of our freedom that we left Egypt with. And the question is, which one is it? How could the matzah be bread of affliction and the bread of freedom simultaneously? And the answer is that we take our slavery, we take that experience and we transform it into freedom. We take slavery, exile, and we create redemption. We take the beginning of the Seder begins with the bitter herbs and the tears, the salt water. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and we transform it into 4 cups of wine, into redemption. The night of Seder shows the contrast, that we could go in one course of one Seder from slavery, from persecution, to freedom and embracing our Jewish heritage and identity at Mount Sinai. So that is the entire message of Passover, that we are free, and we, with God's help, we have the ability to choose a path of freedom. And that's why Jews have always been a nation that have been free, even in the worst circumstances. We never lost our freedom. People throughout the ages, mighty nations who have now disappeared, robbed us of our physical freedom. But the Jew, even during the time of the Inquisitions, or the time of the concentration camps, or the times of great historic oppression, the Jew always remained internally free. Because if you have a Torah, as Viktor Frankl said, anyone who has a why could survive any how. You could deal with any what as long as you have a why. As long as you know who you are and what your purpose in life is, you could overcome every single obstacle. And that is the story of the Exodus from Egypt that we revisit and discuss each and every year with our children and with our family members. And we learn never to become tolerant and accepting of our confinement, never to accept the status quo, but always to challenge the status quo, and to always break down all the barriers that may confine us, and to dream of a world that will be truly free in every way. As I think Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. Don't sit by waiting for change to happen, but rather initiate and take a leap in your life to create that freedom. And yes, to take a jump, you don't know where you're going to land. It's fearful. How am I going to jump? Who knows if I'm going to land safely? But with faith in God, Nachshon, and like Passover demonstrates, we're able to take that great leap. There was a great rabbi, his name was the Radvaz, and he once got a letter from a Jew who was in prison. And he said, I'm allowed to pick one day a year to go free. And I can't decide which day I should choose. Should I choose Yom Kippur? Or should I choose the night of Passover to be free with my family? Should I choose some other great holiday or day, maybe my anniversary, to be with my wife? I'm allowed one day like furlough from prison. And the Radvaz gave him a fascinating answer. He said, choose tomorrow, the first opportunity you have. Sometimes we delay freedom. You know, when I get older, when I have this opportunity, when I have these circumstances, this circumstance. No, the first opportunity that you can bring about your freedom, you seize that moment immediately. It's interesting that on the night of Passover, we talk about the story of our ancestors. And one of the things we say in the night of the Seder is that we say, Mitchila ovdei avodah zara hayu avaseinu. In the beginning, our ancestors were idol worshippers, meaning the father of Abraham was an idol worshiper. V'achshav kervanu hamakom lavodah. But now God brought us closer to his service. And what we're telling the story is going all the way back to Abraham. Abraham came from a house of idolatry. You would have said, well, that's it. He's stuck. He's trapped in that home, in that environment, idolatrous practices. But we begin with the story. Why do we go back to Abraham? Abraham was before the Exodus from Egypt, because that's the message of Passover. Abraham, the first Jew, went on a journey to make the world a better place, to teach the world about monotheism. And because he had the courage to break out of his confinement, which was his home environment, his idolatrous past, and break all the idols of the time, and defy everyone and say, no, I believe in a better world, a better future. I'm not going to sit by passively. That's why we are now a free people. And that's why the Jewish people were born, because of the courage of Abraham at the age of 75 to go out into an unknown world with a message. And the message is the same message of Passover, that human beings are not controlled. Idolatry means that there are different forces that control us. Monotheism believes there's only one God who controls everything. And therefore, we don't have to feel that our lives are governed and predestined by different forces and powers, but rather that we can transcend all limitations in our life. Whatever obstacles, whatever challenges we find ourselves in, we can overcome them. Now, before I continue, I'm just going to check the chat box to see if there's any questions. So no questions yet. Feel free to type in your questions. I'll be happy to try to address them as we continue. So going back to that passage that says, in the beginning, our ancestors were idolatrous, but now God brought us closer to his service. The question is, okay, how do you go free? We know that Passover is about freedom, and it's about having courage and having faith and trusting in God and overcoming obstacles and leaping over boundaries and leaping over obstacles and challenges in our life. And it's wonderful. It sounds great. But what's the practical way to do that? So if you go back to the words that we quoted, when the Haggadah begins, it starts from the very beginning. It says, Mitchila, in the beginning, our ancestors were idolaters, but now God brought us closer to his worship. And the question is, as we said, why are we going all the way back to Terach? And the obvious answer is because we want to remember where we come from and how it took an Abraham who had the courage to break free from his childhood, from his home, from his past. And today we know that psychologists always tell you everything is rooted in your childhood and your upbringing and your past. Those things stay with us for the rest of our lives. But Abraham at the age of 75 was able to make this leap forward through his own recognition, come to the recognition of God. And incidentally, another great hero of the story of the Exodus from Egypt is Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, who gives him refuge when he flees Egypt and allows him to marry his daughter Tzipporah, and ultimately joins the Jewish people in the desert. And he's another role model of somebody who had an idolatrous background, but transcended it because he followed his mind and his heart and his beliefs and his values. And that's why he, like Abraham, left his past behind to join the Jewish people. And Moses ultimately tells him in the desert, go back to your homeland because we need you to inspire people where you come from in Midian and teach them this ability to not be confined. Even if your childhood, your upbringing taught you one thing, you could transcend it. Look at how many Jews today are Balei Teshuvah. They grew up in homes that did not have observance. But like Jethro or like Abraham, they left their background to aspire and embrace a closeness and a relationship with God. That's what Exodus from Egypt is all about. And every person in their own way has to say, am I just going through the motions, living with my old habits, my old ways, my old confinement, because I don't have the courage to change, to better my life, to take a leap forward? Or do I have faith that I can grow, I can change, I could embrace a higher identity? So the Slonim Rebbe, one of the great Hasidic masters, says something beautiful. He says, mitchila, which means when you live in the past our ancestors were idolaters. So he reinterprets it Hasidically. He says, mitchila, when I live in the past, that's idolatry. V'achshav, when I live in the now, in the present, That is karvanu hamakam lavadosa. That is serving God, which means to say as follows: that why don't people go free? We all know the syndrome, Stockholm Syndrome, where you start to identify with your captors. Not only do you become tolerant of your circumstances, but you start to like your circumstances. Passover teaches us, don't make peace with negative circumstances. Don't rationalize. Rationalize as rationalize falsehoods. We sometimes rationalize, well, I'm this way or that way. These are my circumstances. This is the best I can do. I'm not really capable. No, that's rationalize. Freedom reminds us, what do you want to really be? Who do you want to be? What do you want to become? What do you envision for yourself, for your family? Now take that leap forward, jump into the sea and achieve it, so to speak. And the seas will split. Miracles will occur, but you have to initiate that, to split the sea and uncover your inner depth, just like when the sea split, the inner depths of the Jewish people was revealed and their deep connection from God to God. And so the message is, when you live in the past, when you're stuck, Jews are people who always remember the past and learn from the past, but we never live in the past. We live in the present and we prepare for the future. Someone said, yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery. Today is a gift from God, and that's why it's called the present. There was a great Hasidic master, Hasidic Jew, his name was Mendel Futerfas. And he sat in prison, unfortunately. He was arrested by the Soviets. He was put into the gulags for being a Jew in communist Russia. And he told a lot of stories. And one of the stories was, he says he was once sitting around with other prisoners. Two stories actually that come to mind that are relevant here. He said one story was, he was sitting in a bunch of prisoners in the Soviet gulag, and they were bemoaning their past. They were all intellectuals and former professions they had, and they were all saying, "Look at us now. We're just prisoners in communist Russia and Siberia. I was once a professor in university. I was once a general in the army. I was once a great intellect, a writer. And look at us now. We're just prisoners." And each one was so sad because of their past and what happened to them in the present. And Ramendel Futerfas was happy, smiling. They said, "What are you smiling? You must have been a nobody in the past." He says, "No, I'm doing now exactly what I always did." So what do you mean? You're in prison now. How could you be doing what you've always done? He says, "I was always a servant of God, and now I'm a servant of God. I used to be a servant of God in one set of circumstances, and now I'm doing it under these set of circumstances." In other words, whichever circumstance you're in, what does God want from me right now? What does he ask for me at this moment? There's a story that just came to mind, the second story that I mentioned, and that is that he once told over that in the prison they used to play cards. The prisoners had a pack of cards. They would play cards, but it was illegal to play cards there. So when they heard the guards coming, they would hide the cards. But the guards came in, they knew that they were playing cards, so they would do a search all over. They even do a strip search, and they could not find the cards. And when the guards left, the cards would reappear and the game would go on. And so Mendel once said to them, "What's the secret? Where do you hide the cards? These guards look everywhere and they can't find it." They said, "If you promise not to tell, we'll tell you." He said, "Sure, I won't tell." He said, "We are professional thieves. That's why some of us are in prison." And he says, what we do is, used to be professional pickpocketers in Russia. So when the guards come and looking for the cards, one of us slips the cards in the back pocket of the guard. He looks everywhere for the cards, he can't find it. As he's about to leave, we pickpocket it back out of his pocket and we have our cards back. Mendel Futerfas, he learned a very powerful lesson that day, and that is that sometimes we search everywhere else except within our own pocket, right? So sometimes we look at our circumstances and we blame this and we blame that, and we think the solution is out there, but like the door handle on the inside, it's in our own pocket. It's like the kid who came to the rabbi was always trying to stump the rabbi. So he came with a butterfly, said, "Rabbi, what's in my hand? I have a butterfly. Is it alive or dead?" And he figured if the rabbi says it's alive, he'll squeeze his hands together and show him it's dead. If the rabbi says it's dead, he'll release the butterfly and show the rabbi he's wrong. So the rabbi looks at him and he says, "What's in my hand? The butterfly alive or dead?" And the rabbi said, "Sonny boy, the answer is in your hands." And that's the message. It's in our hands. We have the power. But in order to do that, we can't be living in the past or in the future. A lot of times people live with regret, with resentment, with bitterness, grudges. That's living in the past. Or if you live with worry and anxiety, you're living in the future. And what do they both have in common? They rob you from the moment, from the present. Mendel Futterfuss was once talking to his students, and he said to them, what's the holiest place in the world? And the student said, well, the Holy of Holies. And he said, no, for you, the holiest place in the world is right here where you are now. Then he said, who's the holiest person in the world? He said, Moses, Abraham. He said, no, for you, the holiest person in the world is you. And then he said, what's the holiest moment, day in the world, in life of the year? And they said, well, the holiest day is Yom Kippur. He said, no, for you, the holiest day is today. So it's not about being there, the Holy of Holies, being as great as Moses, on the right day, on the right circumstances. I'll do Teshuvah on Yom Kippur. Right now, God put you in this place at this time. What does God want from me right now? That's what it means. In the past, when you're always living in the past or in the future, that's idolatry. When you live in the moment or whatever circumstance you find yourself in, what does God want from me at this very moment? That is the worship of God. And therefore, even if God puts me in a challenging set of circumstances, I try to reveal, I try to uncover, I try to seek out God in this particular set of circumstances. And according to Hasidic philosophy, this goes a step further. Because the truth is, according to Hasidic philosophy, God recreates the world every moment. We actually say it in the prayer book. What do we say in the prayer book? We say, that God renews the world every single day, constantly, continuously, which means this moment is a brand new moment. It's detached from the past because it was God just recreated the world and recreated me at this moment. And therefore, I am a new creation. And therefore, my inhibitions and my restrictions and my confinements and my past challenges don't restrict me. They're not a weight on me because I'm a free person. I was just created by God right now. So I don't carry all the baggage from the past. And that not only pertains to ourselves, but it pertains to other people as well. You know, a lot of times in relationships, especially in marriage, you know, people have preconceived ideas about other people. And when they get annoyed, they say, why are you getting so angry? And the reason is because they're remembering all the past memories and experiences which are triggering their current state. So a husband's driving home late from the office and his wife calls and says, where are you? And he gets annoyed. He's like, why are you always bothering me, asking me, you know, you're always questioning me? All she said is, where are you? The reason you're getting so upset is because you're thinking about all the other times your wife maybe berated you for showing up late. So you're bringing all that past into the present and you're getting annoyed. But if you look at your wife, like she was just recreated now, or my husband, he doesn't carry the past with him. Or your fellow man, George Burns once said, the only smart person I know is my tailor because he always takes a new measurement every time I come. We're always like, we have images, we have depictions, and we have pre-programmed ideas of who people are, and we don't give them a chance to show themselves now in who they are in the present. So being in the present, living in the present, finding what God wants from us in this particular moment, and viewing others with that new eye is the example. I'll tell you a very powerful story in the Talmud about living in the now, because there are a lot of secular books about the power of now and present, and that's what Hakadah is saying is, what does God want from me in these circumstances? In the Talmud Yerushalmi, in Jerusalem Talmud, there's the following story. There were two brother-in-laws in the Talmud. It's a fascinating story, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And the story is that the two of them were in Israel, and they went to the Chamet Feria, which is the hot springs of Tiberias. You may have heard about the natural hot springs, and they went there to bathe. As they were about to go in, these two great sages, again, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, there was a poor man by the door of the bathhouse, and he said to them, could you give me some charity? So they said to him, you know, we're going into the bathhouse. When we come out, we'll give you some charity. The Talmud says they went in. When they came out, they found that the man had died. while they were in the bathhouse. Now, I'll stop and ask you, if you went into a bathhouse or into a supermarket and a poor man asked you for charity, and you come out, you say, I'll give you when I come out. And when you come out, a half hour later, the guy's dead. You would be so ridden with guilt, right? What would you do? But this is what these rabbis in the Talmud said to each other. They said, we were not able to take care of him during his lifetime. At least let us take care of him right now. Let us arrange for a dignified funeral and burial for him. So they went out to prepare. They bought a plot and they prepared everything. And when they went to cleanse his body, which is the tradition to go through the tahara, the purification process before they bury him, they started to undress him. And hidden beneath his coat, they found a pouch of money, which means this man was really not poor. He had plenty of money. He was sick. He was, got mentally ill. He was acting like a poor man, begging for money when he had plenty of money. And what they realized was that they didn't kill him. Had they given him money before they went into the bathhouse, he would not have lived because he was not using his money. He was hiding it all. And the powerful message of the Talmud is that had they just said, oh, woe is to us, we caused an innocent man to die, and just gone on with guilt and regret, nothing would have happened. But because they said, no, maybe we caused him to die, but we can't live with the past regret. We have to do the best we can right now for him. What can we do for him now? We could give him a proper burial. Because they took that approach of living in the moment and saying, what can I do now to help this person, despite my failings in the past? That's why they discovered that they were not guilty in the first place. And often in life, one of the imprisonments is living with past regrets versus looking at the moment and saying, despite the mistakes I've made, despite whatever challenges I've had in the past, what can I do in the moment? And it's often when we do that, we discover that we don't have to live with those regrets. We don't have to live with that resentment of past circumstances. And that's the ability of now to believe that you can go free right now. And actually the story of Rav Shlakish and Rabbi Yochanan, these two rabbis, is quite fascinating because they became great friends and great colleagues. But the story was that the Talmud says Rav Shlakish was a gladiator. And he was a thief, a bandit, a criminal, a common criminal. And Rabbi Yochanan was once bathing actually in a river. And Rabbi Yochanan, Rav Shlakish, jumped off a rock into the water. Fierce, mighty person. He plunged into the water. And Rabbi Yochanan looked at Rav Shlakish, who was a Jew, but a bandit. He's not called rabbi, he's called Rav Shlakish. He was the head of the bandits, the Talmud says. And he said to him, in Aramaic, the Talmud says, he said to him, Chelach la'araisa, your power and strength should be devoted to Torah study. You have such power, strength. Torah study takes devotion, hard commitment, devotion, hard work, effort, strenuous study. You should devote your strength to the study of Torah. Well, Reish Lakish, this bandit, turned to Rabbi Yochanan and said, well, shufrach lenashim. Rabbi Yochanan was a very good-looking man. The rabbis tell us in the Talmud he was very handsome. He said, your beauty should be devoted to women. You're so beautiful. You should devote your beauty to women. Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Shlakish, I'll tell you what, I have a sister who's gorgeous. Obviously, they had good genes in their family. He said, if you start studying Torah, I'll introduce you to my sister. And that's what happened. Rabbi Shlakish went to study Torah, became a great sage, married the sister of Rabbi Yochanan, and the two of them became study partners, brother-in-laws and study partners, to the extent that the Talmud says, when Rabbi Shlakish died, Rabbi Yochanan mourned. He couldn't find someone to fill the shoes of his study partner. And when you look at the story, it's hard to believe. What was Rabbi Yochanan thinking? If you study Torah, I'll let you marry my sister. I mean, what? You're going to let your sister marry some bandit, some gladiator, some criminal, just because he's studying Torah? You're going to give over your sister to entice him, to encourage him to study Torah? Like, what's going on? And furthermore, the question is, why did Rabbi Shlakish take the deal? He's not interested in studying Torah, but to marry the sister of Yochanan, he's going to start studying Torah. I mean, if he was a gladiator and he was a criminal, I'm sure he had plenty of women on the side. He didn't have to study Torah to marry Rav Shlakish's sister, or Rabbi Yochanan's sister. So what's the meaning of the story? One of the beautiful explanations is that what motivated Rav Shlakish to study Torah was not that he's going to get a pretty wife, Rabbi Yochanan's sister, but rather, for the first time in his life, someone looked at him and said, I believe in you. I believe in you so wholeheartedly that you could transform your life and change to the extent that I'm willing to put my, so to speak, my money where my mouth is. I'm willing to let you marry my sister if you change your ways. And as a criminal, everyone always wrote him off as, he's hopeless. No one ever believed in him. Maybe that's why he became a criminal, because maybe his own parents didn't believe in him. And suddenly he met a person that says, I believe in your potential. That just like you took a physical leap into the water with such power and strength, you could take that leap spiritually and become worthy of my sister. That's how great you could become through the process of self-transformation of teshuvah. And that's what touched Reb Shlokish so deeply, that someone believed in him for the first time in his inner potential. And that's why he transformed his life. And that's why he ended up marrying the sister of Rabbi Yochanan. And so that's the message of Passover, freedom. Freedom comes through courage, through taking a big leap. But in order to do that, you have to believe in the power of now, that you're not constricted with the past mistakes, circumstances of your life, and there's nothing before you that you have to fear. With faith in God and hope in God and trust in God, God could transform you and lead you to the greatest heights. And indeed, when we come to the second night of Passover, we start counting the 49 days to get to Passover, to Shavuot, when we receive the Torah, which is incremental steps, 49 steps to get to the holiday of Shavuot. But in the middle of that, we have a second Passover. On the 14th day of Nisan, God gave us a second Passover for those who missed the first Passover. And the message is, even as we grow incrementally and we're progressing, it's not enough. We also have to take leaps. And that's the solar calendar versus the lunar calendar. The first commandment the Jewish people got was to count the months of the year based on the months of the moon. The difference between the moon and the sun is consistently the same size. We all need consistency in our life. We all have to be dependable and reliable and consistent. But we also have to be like the moon, which even when it vanishes, it goes through a weakening for 15 days at the end of the month, from the 15th to the 30th. And then it disappears, but suddenly there's a rebirth and a renewal and a resurgence, and it begins to gain momentum and grow stronger and stronger. And so too, human beings have both of those abilities. Yes, we want to have a consistent, persistent, continuous track of doing good. But even if we decline like the moon, even if we have a fall, even if we succumb, we could always get back up and have a rebirth and a renewal. And if the Jews went out of Egypt, which our rabbis tell us, no slave could ever get free. It was the most guarded prison. But if they were able to break out of that, God says you could break out of everything. There's a beautiful verse in the book of Psalms, and we say it in the daily Psalms, and it says, Hanochi Hashem Lakecha, I'm the Lord your God. Hamalcha Meretz Yisrael, I took you out of the land of Egypt. Harchev Picha v'malei, open your mouth wide and I will fill it up. And the question is, what's the connection between the first half and the second half of the verse? And the answer is very simple. Sometimes we don't open up our mouth wide for God to fill it up. And that means also opening our mouth in prayer, asking for big things, because we're like, God, that's too much to ask for. I'll just ask for something small. I'm not even going to dream that big. I'm not going to have a chalom gadol, a big dream, a big vision, because I don't see how I can get there incrementally. And the idea of Pesach is you don't have to get there incrementally. God could take you on a leap in an instant, like the Jews. 1 minute they were slaves, the next minute they were free. They didn't even have time to bake their matzah. That's how fast the transition happened. Wherever we are in our lives, we have to believe that God can take us out of it with hope and faith and initiative, taking that leap in our lives. God could land us in a whole different place. One of the Chabad Rebbes famously said, the whole world says if you can't go under, you go over. But I say you should go l'chatchila Rebbe. I think it was the Rebbe Marash. You should go right over in the first place. In other words, don't even try to go through the natural way. Go with a leap forward, jump over it. And sometimes it's scary to take a jump because you may fall, you may hurt yourself, you may land on concrete. I don't know. You'll like Nachshon, I'll drown in the sea. But you have to have that faith and that trust that you can, with Hashem's help, land in the right place. And therefore, the whole message of Pesach is that freedom comes about through our leaping forward, through our taking the initiative. And then God will, if you remember, God took you out of Egypt every day. Therefore, open your mouth wide, dream big, have big aspirations, big goals. You know the story, there was a simple shamash. He lived in somewhere in Europe, and he was blind and poor, and he had no children. And by one thing he did every day, he went to the synagogue 5 o'clock, opened up the shul, put wood in the fire, warmed it up, and prepared it for the Jews to come to the synagogue. And one day an angel comes to him and says, God sent me to grant you any wish, because you're such a pious man, you come every day, and I'm going to grant you anything you want. God wants to grant you anything. So the man was a smart man. He said, any grant, any wish. Let me go home and talk to my wife. Tomorrow when I come back, I'll answer you. So the angel said, fine. He goes home to talk to his wife, and they stay up all night discussing what wish should they ask for. So the first they said, let's ask for children. We never had children. Let's ask for children. Then they said, 1 minute, we're blind. Wouldn't it be good to see? Let's ask for vision, for sight. Then they said, we're so poor. Let's ask for livelihood, sustenance. Then they said, 1 minute, long life is the greatest blessing. Let's ask for long life. So all night they're going over the 4 options: children, sight, prosperity, financial freedom, to give charity, do other things, or long life. In the morning, the old shamash, the caretaker of the synagogue, goes back to the synagogue, and he meets the angel again. The angel said, did you talk to your wife? He said, yeah. He said, did you decide what you want? He said, yeah. He said, so what do you want? So listen to what the shamash says to the angel. He says, we decided we want to live to see our great-grandchildren eating out of golden bowls. We want to live to see great-grandchildren, eating out of golden bowls, wealth, prosperity. Sometimes we limit ourselves. We confine ourselves. Well, I could only do this. I could only do that. The idea of Pesach is taking that leap forward and believing that we can do anything and living in the moment, not being way down from the past. I love telling this story about, I told it recently on one of the daily videos, but there was a poor Jew, and he didn't have money for an esrog for Sukkot. So he's very sad. What's he going to do? So as he's rolling up his tefillin on the day before Sukkot, he says, 8 days of Sukkot, I don't wear tefillin. You don't wear tefillin during Sukkot. Why don't I go ahead, sell my tefillin, and buy an esrog so I could do the mitzvah of Sukkot? After the holiday, I'll figure out how I could get tefillin. He was so excited. He ran, sold his tefillin, took the money, bought an esrog, came home, he left it on the counter, and he went to get ready for the holiday. When he comes back, he looks for his esrog. It's not there. He says to his wife, did you see the box I left here? She says, oh, yeah, thank you so much for buying a lemon for the salad. I appreciate it. I squeezed the lemon and made a delicious salad. He says to his wife, that wasn't a lemon. That was an esrog. I sold my tefillin to buy an esrog for the holiday, thinking I don't need a tefillin for 8 days. I'll buy an esrog after the holiday. I'll figure out how to get tefillin in 8 days from now. And you cut up my esrog and squeezed it in the salad. And she was like, her mouth dropped. She didn't know what to say. And suddenly he runs up and gives her a big hug and a kiss. And she says, Yankel, have you lost your mind? I just cut up your esrog that you sold your tefillin to buy, and you're hugging me and kissing me. And this chassid said something very profound. He says, when I finished using my tefillin on the morning before the holiday, I said, well, I don't need it for 8 days. Right now, the mitzvah is to have an esrog for the holiday, lulav and esrog. So I'll do the mitzvah right now. I'll sell my tefillin to buy a lulav and esrog. He said, now that you told me you cut up the esrog, and I don't have an esrog, then my question is, what's the mitzvah right now? The mitzvah right now is for me to have a joyous holiday with my wife and be in love with my wife and not be angry with my wife, and to love my spouse, to have a joyous holiday. Am I going to get angry and lose that mitzvah that I can do, which is the joy of the holiday with my family? Right now, my mitzvah is to love my wife, and that's what I'm going to do. And that's a very powerful mindset, to always live with, okay, whatever happened, happened. But what can I do right now? That's freedom. Freedom is to be able to be present and not be imprisoned by the past or by the future, but to be truly free and live in the moment that we're in. That is the message of Passover, and to believe in the potential of ourselves and God's infinite potential for ourselves to grant us whatever it is we need in our lives, and to not hold back, and to realize that God has more in store for us than we could even imagine, and not limit ourselves by thinking small. but realizing that God wants us to live lives that are free, and God wants us to be happy. God wants us to be fulfilled and live meaningful and purposeful lives. So surely God will help us achieve all of that in our lives. And I bless everyone that as we approach this holiday of Pesach, this year we experienced uh, to some measure what freedom means. We started last Passover in lockdown, which is a form of confinement. We were confined to our homes. And this year, Passover is going to be a lot better. We're going to be together outside under the stars as a community. Many families are able to come together, but we feel there's a movement towards freedom. And we realize that we're blessed, that thank God we survived and we're healthy and we're well, and we don't take it for granted, so to speak. And so as we now come to the holiday of Passover, which is all about gratitude, we're grateful as well for the developments of the ability through the initiative of man. Again, God partners with man. God helps those that help themselves to develop vaccines to help us find our freedom and blesses our efforts. But at the same time, to ask ourselves, just like within a year we found a vaccine, doctor found a vaccine to try to rid the world of this pandemic. There are so many more challenges that we face in all areas of life. But if we put our minds together and we work together cohesively in unity, we could achieve everything that God will grant us so that we could have freedom on every level. Most of all, spiritual freedom, the freedom of happiness, the contentment, of satisfaction, of appreciation, of gratitude, of fulfillment in our lives. And that obviously comes from having trust and faith in God and having the courage based on our faith in God to take the steps or the leaps necessary in our lives to achieve our greatest goals and aspirations. Before we sign off, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type it in. And thank you. I appreciate that you will share it with others at your Seder, Bonnie, and wishing you a happy and a kosher Passover. And look forward to seeing each other soon. Next week, there won't be a class due to the holiday, but we'll resume afterwards, and wishing everyone a happy, sweet, we wish each other a sweet Passover, because the maror is bitter. It's not sadness, it's bitterness. The bitterness, when we taste something bitter, it reminds us how grateful we are for the fact that we have sweetness in our life. So it's a bitterness that leads to a greater appreciation of the sweetness of life rather than makes us sad. We remember the past on Passover only to have a deeper and a greater fondness and appreciation for our freedoms. And most of all, the night of Passover, we remind ourselves that we were once slaves. So when we look around and we see others that find themselves in a position of confinement, whatever it is, we have to release them. We have to free them from their bondage. And that's why the night of Passover, we begin by saying, whoever's hungry, whoever's needy, kol dechvin, whoever needs anything, come and join us for the Seder. Because if God granted me something, a blessing, a freedom, I now have to use it to unlock someone else's prison doors and help free them of their circumstances. And that's why this is a very special year. It's the 3,333rd anniversary of the Exodus from Egypt. 3,333 years later, we're still reminding ourselves every year with our families, and the Seder night is the most attended service of the whole year. We're constantly reminding ourselves of the kindness that God did to us so that we could pay it forward to help others. And just like God intervened to rescue us, we have to intervene to help rescue others. And this is the way we begin our story of national Jewish identity, with remembering God's kindness and remembering that God grants us the greatest gift of life, which is free will. And free will doesn't just mean that I'm free to do what I want, when I want, or how I want, but I'm free to live my life according to my higher purpose, rather than be controlled by those forces within my being that may try to inhibit me or try to confine me and limit my divine spiritual soul's expression in life. Wishing everyone a wonderful day and a Chag Kasher V'Sameach. Thank you all for joining.